Okay folks, fasten your seatbelts because we're about to go into detail on the time of flight mass spectrometer. In this video, we're going to go through firstly what it does and then secondly how it works, which is going to take a little bit of time, but there's no other way to do this other than in one video. So I'm going to try and keep this under 10 minutes for you. So time of flight mass spectrometer, what does it do? Well, in one sentence, it does two things. It detects the mass and the relative abundance of isotopes. So if you put in a sample of an element, what it's going to do is it's going to tell you what isotopes you've got, in other words, what the masses of those isotopes are, and it's going to tell you relatively how much of each isotope you have. Okay, so really, really clever bit of kit. There's different types of mass spectrometer, but the one we need to know is this time of flight mass spectrometer, and we do need to know how it works, and that happens in three very distinct stages. The first of these stages is ionization, and this happens at the very beginning, the left-hand side of this time of flight mass spectrometer. Now, when I say ionization, it's not like you would normally expect with metals forming positive ions and non-metals forming negative ions. Every single atom in this sample is going to be given a 1+ charge, okay? And that's massively important for how this actually works. It's fundamental to how this works. Now, ionization, giving these atoms a 1+ charge, turning them into ions, can happen in two very distinct ways. I'm going to go through the two different ways now. The first of the two methods is known as electron impact and does exactly what it says on the tin. But before we get to that stage, something really important needs to happen, and that is our sample is superheated, so it's vaporized. Okay, so our sample is vaporized. So basically your sample may be a solid or a liquid or even in solution actually, and that sample is superheated to turn it into a gas. So it's basically vaporized, separating out all the individual atoms. Next up is the ionization stage. Now those gaseous atoms, those vaporized atoms are bombarded with electrons from what's known as an electron gun. Genuinely, that's not me making that up, that's what it's called. So this electron gun fires electrons at the sample, and what happens is it knocks an electron off each atom. So by equation, what we get is X gas plus an electron. So that's the electron we've just fired at it. That then gives us X plus gas, so ionized our sample, and 2 electrons. So those 2 electrons, one of them is the one that we fired at the sample in the first place. The other one is the one that got knocked off that sample. Okay, so the X gas goes in, X plus comes out. What you see here is the ionized sample. So we can get multiple electrons taken off, but what we're assuming is at this level that everything just has one electron knocked off and we end up with a positive charge. So everything that comes out of this mass spectrometer has a 1+ charge. So that is electron impact. It's a really classic way of ionizing our sample at the beginning of this process. The second of the two methods is known as the Electrospray technique. So Electrospray ionization, just like there's a prerequisite in electron impact of it being vaporized, with Electrospray ionization, your sample needs to be dissolved in a volatile solvent. Now, volatile doesn't mean reactive, it means turned into a gas very easily. Okay, so it vaporizes very, very easily. That's what volatile means. So our sample dissolved in a volatile solvent. Next up, once it's dissolved in that volatile solvent, it's pushed through at really high pressure, a really fine charged needle, and that causes it to be turned into a fine spray. Okay, so you've got this needle, which is represented just above that number 1 in the diagram there, and that turns it into a really, really fine spray. But not only does it turn it into a fine spray, that volatile solvent with your sample in, it also gives it its charge and ionizes it. This happens in a different way to electron impact. What happens here is that a hydrogen ion is gained from the solvent. Okay, so what we've got is our X gas, this time not losing an electron, but gaining a proton, gaining a hydrogen ion and turning it into XH+. So you'll see that it's actually been given a positive charge just like it did before, but we do have an extra hydrogen atom or an extra proton attached to our sample. So underlining that there, that's our ion that gets pushed through our mass spectrometer here. Now, really important note here, this method of electrospray ionization increases the MZ value, the mass to charge ratio value, by 1. Now, might not know what that is just yet, okay? But essentially it's increasing the mass of that atom by 1, okay? So if you put a sample of oxygen through, for example, oxygen, let's say an isotope of oxygen, 16. If you used electrospray ionization, the mass result that it would give you out of the mass spectrometer would be 17, okay? Because we've gained a proton, it's increased the mass number by 1, hasn't it? So that's what I mean there, all right? If you put oxygen in at 16, it's going to come out at 17 when you get your results at the end because of that extra proton, and you need to account for that at the end. What I will say at this point is that electron impact is by far the most commonly questioned about. Electrospray is not actually mentioned in AQA, but it's still there. You do need to know it, okay? So electrospray ionization, be aware of it, okay? And what the consequences of that are. So, first of all, ionization. We need to ionize our sample. It needs to have a 1+ charge on the sample for the rest of the machine to work. Next up, we've got acceleration. I'm going to put a little number 2 next to these 2 T-bars that you see in a diagram, and this is acceleration. So once we've vaporized and ionized our sample, we need to accelerate those forwards to the other end of the tube. What these 2 T-bars in this diagram are charged plates. Now those charged plates create an electric field. Now of course what we've got is an ionized sample. Everything's got a 1+ charge in it. So as soon as those get anywhere near our charged plates, they're going to be affected by it. When those ions get near that electric field, they are all accelerated forwards, but they're all accelerated forwards, massively important bit here, with the same kinetic energy. Okay, so they are all given exactly the same kinetic energy. But the thing is, that doesn't mean they're all traveling at the same speed. They might all have the same kinetic energy, but they will have different velocities due to their differences in mass. So let's say you've put a sample in, you've got a number of different isotopes in that sample. They're all given the same kinetic energy, but not all of them will travel at the same pace, at the same velocity. Think about it. If you give the same kinetic energy to a ping pong ball and a bowling ball, which of them is going to be traveling faster if you hit them with the same force? Basically, the ping pong ball is going to move off at a lot faster pace because it's lighter. Bowling ball, not so much. So that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, so they're given the same kinetic energy, and what it is that the lighter ones travel faster and the heavier ions slower. So what we can say is the greater the mass, the lower the velocity. Okay, so the greater the mass of a particular isotope, the slower it's going to move down that flight tube. Now, let's see if we can put some sort of pictorial evidence to this. So let's say we've ionized our sample. I'm going to use 4 dots here just to represent, let's say, 4 atoms in a sample. There's no way I'm going to draw any more than that. Once they get to this charged plate here, they start to get moved forward. Okay, so those 4 dots start to line up and get separated there. Now, because they are all given the same kinetic energy, okay, and because they all have different masses, let's say all 4 of these have different masses, they're all going to have different velocities. So these are fired along the tube here, accelerated forward by that electric field. So as it goes down the flight tube, and this is called our flight tube, the faster ones obviously shoot off first, then obviously the next slowest, and then the next slowest, and then the slowest. So as they move down the flight tube, this first one here, let's say that's the lightest, that's going to be here. The second lightest is going to be here, third lightest, and fourth lightest. Now, the further they travel down the flight tube, the bigger the difference between these, or the bigger the distance between these samples is going to be. Okay, so let's say you had a fast runner, a slow runner. The longer the race, obviously, the bigger the gap between the fastest and the slowest is going to be. Okay, so this whole process here, as these are accelerated down the flight tube, the heavy ones end up at the back, the lighter ones at the front. This is known as ion drift. So this process of ion drift is what enables the machine to separate out the individual isotopes from each other, because they're all mixed together when you first put them in the sample. This whole process separates them all out, sifting them out. So we've got our lighter ones coming in first, then our second lightest, then our third, and then of course the heaviest at the end. Last but not least then, we need to show that these are separated. And how do we do that? Well, when they hit the end, where I'm going to put the number 3 here, That is the third and final step, and that is detection. So we are detecting as these ions hit the detector, then we can pick them up and decide, well, how many different isotopes have we got? We can calculate their mass, and it's all done by a computer, and of course their relative abundance as well. So it's all computerized, this bit. We don't need to know how they calculate it, but we just need to know what information we get at the end. How does this detector work though? Well, this detector at the end is basically a negatively charged plate. So there's loads and loads of electrons knocking around in there. When our positive ions hit that plate, they gain electrons when they get there. Okay, this causes an electrical current. So essentially, if you imagine you've got loads of electrons knocking around in here, okay, as soon as this positively charged ion hits the plate, these electrons flood towards that boundary there, if you like, okay? And because they're flooding towards that boundary, that causes an electrical current this way, okay? So just imagine it like that. Like I said, we don't need to go into too much detail, but essentially those positive ions gain an electron when they get to the other end. So that causes that flow of electrons as those positive ions hit there, that causes an electrical current. That electrical current is basically monitored by a computer and analyzed to give what we call a spectra. Now that spectra, okay, gives us the mass to charge ratios. It gives us the masses basically of those different isotopes and their relative abundance. Now that is another video. Okay, so if you look to the videos after this, how we read spectra, what they're telling us, then that's the information we basically get out of this mass spectrometer. So I told you this was going to be a bit of a marathon. There's a lot of information here, but it's something that if you know how it works and you get a big question on it in the exam, then you're laughing all the way to the bank, aren't you? So our time of flight mass spectrometer basically detects the mass and relative abundance of the isotopes. 3 stages. Number 1, it's ionized. 2 methods with respect to ionization. What we've got is electron impact, first of all, which takes an electron away and gives it a positive charge. On the contrary, we have an electrospray ionization, less common, but it's a slightly different method and charges it in a slightly different way by making it gain a proton, and that gives it its positive charge. And just be aware, it does increase the mass of it by 1 because it's gaining a proton. Next up, we've got acceleration. An electric field, okay, causes the ions to be accelerated forwards with the same kinetic energy. Always a mark for that when you mention that. But they do have different velocities due to their different masses, and you'll take a look at that in the equation for this as well. Bigger the mass, the lower the velocity. Obviously, the inverse is true as well. Lower the mass, the greater the velocity. This is known as ion drift, as they get separated out along this long flight tube here. Lighter ones get there first, heavier ones get there last. Lastly, detection, negatively charged detector. As the positive ions gain electrons, they cause an electrical current. That electrical current is monitored. We don't need to know how or why or the magic jiggery pokery computer wizardry behind it. We just need to know that it does. And it's monitored and analyzed to give our spectra. And that is what gives us the mass and relative abundance of each of those individual isotopes that have been separated out in the flight tube. Okay, so I've used 4 dots here. I'm assuming in this sample there are 4 different isotopes. So just imagine they go down in like clusters of isotopes, if you like. So that, in a nutshell, or a smaller nutshell as I can manage, is how your time of flight mass spectrometer works. Like I said, following on, analyzing spectra and so on and so forth, and any calculations you need to do, they're covered in other videos, but this is how it works.